This is Lisa from MobileTechReview, and this is the Alienware M17 R3. So this is the 2020 release. And now for something different. Not that this looks much different from the previous generation, but a lot has changed inside. And this is the first time in, it seems like years, that I won't have to bash Alienware for the cooling. We're going to look at it now. So the R3 looks pretty much like the R2 at first blush, which makes sense. It's the second iteration of what they call their Legend design. So even though they stuck with the same M17 nomenclature, they switched designs between Gen 1 and Gen 2. Got that? Anyway, there are improvements here over the R2, which was one hot customer and had some drawbacks. So the keyboard travel is now increased, and it really feels good. It's back to those Alienware keyboards that actually are really pleasant if you like to type on them, not just game, though they're great for gaming too. 1.7 millimeters of key travel. Of course, you have your option of getting either Zone or RGB per key backlit keyboards. Probably most people are going to opt for that per key. And you get the lighting effects, the Tron lights as they call it, on the back, and the Alien logo you can do, and the keyboard itself, but not the trackpad anymore. A little bit less, no more side heat, LED pipes and stuff like that, because they have thinned it down so much to under 22 millimeters at this point. So I think it's worth the trade-off for a lot of people. We have a micro SD card slot this time, so yay, content creators will be happy to see that. Cooling is significantly improved. We have a vapor chamber cooler over the CPU, and not the GPU, but the CPU is the one that really needed it. It's a very big heatsink on here. They say they're using like 35% more copper, which is what the heat sinks are made of, and the fan tubes and all that, and also about 40% more diameter, or pipe size. Good things. The drawback is still the motherboard is inverted on this, just like the previous generation, and just like the MSI GS Stealth series of laptops. What does that mean? So when you open it up and you take off the bottom cover, which is easy peasy to do, you can't actually remove the fans and the heatsink if you want to repaste it. So you're going to have to take out the motherboard, which involves disconnecting a bunch of connectors and removing some screws. And it's an annoyance, that's for sure. You have to be more of an enthusiast to do that, but I think Alienware customers tend to be enthusiasts if you want to repaste it. I'm not sure that it's totally necessary to do such a thing. In the case of the Alienware, at least ours was cool, thermally speaking, for an Alienware. We'll get into that even more later. Also, they have fancier pants fans now with more fan blades than ever. You get the idea. That's what all the manufacturers are doing. And some Kevlar-like material for the fans, and a fire-resistant CPU fan, which only makes me nervous. Why would you make a fire-resistant fan? But hey. Pricing for this starts around $1,600 list price, and that gets you a Core i7. This is the Intel 10th Gen refresh for CPUs. And it gets you an AMD Radeon 5500M, so kind of a low-end GPU there. But for about $50 more, you can move up to a GTX 1660 Ti. The real meat of the line gets to be probably for a lot of you looking at something like the new RTX 2070 Super. And you can get that for around $2,000 if you opt for the base full HD 144Hz display. 16 gigs of RAM and the 256 gig SSD. You can upgrade the SSD yourself. That's pretty easy. Anyway, that's something to talk about also with the GPUs here. Unlike most, relatively speaking, thin and light gaming laptops where they're using Max-Q graphics, the lower powered version, we're using Max-P, or the full mobile versions of graphics in here. You don't see that a lot. The MSI GE Raider series does that, for example, except for their RTX 2080 that gets Max-Q'd. So with the 17-inch line, all of your options, right up to the RTX 2080 Super, are full Max-P models. On our 2070 Super that we're using, it's using 120 watts of power when gaming, so that's full power. Good times. Now for the R15 M3, the 15-inch version of this, the same is true. Max-P all the way up until you get to the 2080 Super, and that one they use Max-Q, but that's for the 15-inch, not the 17-inch. Speaking of things that are still not so great, RAM is still soldered on board, and I will keep moaning and complaining about this until they change that, because gaming laptop purchasers are enthusiasts, and also there are folks who buy this because they're probably trying to do some high-end professional work, like video editors, for example, or renderers. And you might think, well, I can get by with 16, or now 32 at least. The last gen was limited at 16 gigs at launch. Now you can go up to 32. But anyway, 16 is fine for me now, but will it be 2 years from now? Well, you better get more RAM now because you can't change it later. The Wi-Fi card is a Killer 6 card, and that's actually an Intel card. It's the Killer 1650 card. And that is soldered on board too. I'm less bothered by that because that's a pretty good card, and I doubt that Wi-Fi 7 is going to be coming out anytime soon. We're barely even using Wi-Fi 6 routers, so that's fine. For the displays, it gets almost confusing, and some of this is tied into the chassis color that you pick. So we have the Lunar Light model, which, by the way, now has a clear coat on it, so it feels a little bit less soft touch, but also that means your pizza greasy hands won't be a lasting memory that you'll still see 6 months later. So you got the Lunar Light, and you have the Dark Side of the Moon, which is a deep charcoal gray, which I like, but it seems to have fewer configurations available. So there's 3 display options here. There's a full HD base model, IPS 144 Hz display with a 9 millisecond response time. That's not bad at all for a base display. Full HD resolution, matte, non-touch. You get the idea. Supports both G-Sync and Optimus. You hit the FN and F7 keys to switch between those. So for those who are looking for some battery life, though, I still think that the 17-inch Alienware anyway is getting big enough and heavy enough that I don't look at this as your everyday carry it everywhere kind of laptop. We have the next step up, which is a 300 Hz display. This is the year of crazy high refresh rates, which makes sense, actually, even if you're never going to reach those frame rates in a game, because if you're using G-Sync, we'll get about that, it offers you more sync points where you can actually get nice smooth frame rates. Anyway, more multipliers. However, with Dell's image from the factory, G-Sync is not enabled. Now, people say that if they remove the NVIDIA drivers completely and then reinstall them fresh or reinstall Windows, then they can enable G-Sync. I have not done that, but I can tell you that games look really smooth in a variety of multipliers and frame rates on this without enabling G-Sync or the dreaded V-Sync on it. Looks good. So this one's a 3 millisecond response time display, a little bit faster for you esports people and first-person shooter types, and has a little bit better color gamut. Subjectively speaking, this is a very nice looking display. It may not be your super wide gamut kind of display for creative types, but it looks good. And they claim for both of the full HD models that it's 300 nits. Ours actually measured 341 nits. You can see the metrics on screen right now. So I like it quite well. But there is a 4K display option. Again, this is more for creative types, I think, because it's a 25 millisecond response time, 60 Hertz display. So you're not going to get those high frame rates if you're a first-person shooter type and all that. But that one's full Adobe RGB. That's not OLED. That is an IPS class display. But it should be very nice to look at, and they claim 500 nits. Nice. I'd like to see, like they used to do, a 2K display option, something like that, because we have so much horsepower in this laptop. It can really easily drive games above 1080p resolution. So instead of being overkill for your 1080p gaming, unless you are playing like Overwatch and you want as many frames as possible, it would be cool. Ports on this, other than the addition of the microSD card slot, are about the same as last generation. You have 3 USB-A ports, you have 1 Thunderbolt 3 out the rear, and you have a Alienware graphics amplifier port as well, and it's still a nice affordable alternative for an external graphics solution if you plan on sticking with Alienware since it's proprietary to them. You also have HDMI 2.0B, you have mini DisplayPort 1.4, and of course you got a headphone jack and Gigabit killer Ethernet as well. So that Thunderbolt 3 port, in this way, it behaves like a Dell, because that's their parent company. So it worked fine with external, like Samsung SSDs, with docks and all that sort of thing. But for those of you who are graphics arts kind of people, I know we have a following, the Wacom Cintiq Pro line that uses the USB-C single connector solution, this laptop, like the Dell XPS 13, thinks it's a dock instead of a display. So I had to go back to the multi-cable solution for connecting that. So if you're hoping for single cable with Wacom here, no. So how about sound quality through the built-in speakers? Well, the R2 was nothing special. A lot of gaming laptops these days, surprisingly, are not anything special. Since you can actually hear these speakers over the fan noise, let's pay attention to them. They've improved them some. The biggest thing is the spatial separation and the sense of volume and a little bit more bass coming through, simply because they added front bass ports. It still has the down-firing ports on this, which are your main ones, but they've got the 2 little slits on the front now, so it makes it sound pretty good. The volume is good. There's some bass, not a super lot, but it's not tinny and irritating or anything like that, so as gaming laptop speakers go, they're decent. So back to performance in gaming. I mean, the benchmarks are all good. One thing about Alienware, and it takes a while to when reviewing these and using these and learning that, you know, some laptop manufacturers like Razer, probably because they caught so much flack for the original 14-inch blade that ran like a toaster oven. Razer limits the power level to the CPU and other things to keep things from getting too hot anymore. Alienware kind of says the world's your oyster. You're going to let this thing run all the way up to thermal max, and it's up to you to choose your fan profile, to do whatever it is that you want to tame it or not tame it. So that said, it runs a lot cooler than the last generation. A lot cooler means by about 5 degrees centigrade, which is a pretty significant drop thanks to that redesign of all the cooling and internals. In some games, this is a bit more than that. In some games, not as much. It really depends a lot on how CPU dependent some games are. So, as an example, for something like The Witcher 3, which looks like it's kind of CPU dependent there, gets toasty, but not unbearable. Now, everything we ran, we did a 1080p ultra testing. VSync is turned off, no frame rate limiting on these laptops, and DirectX 11, because DirectX 12 is still a little bit of a mixed bag in a lot of games. Anyway, frame rates in the games were excellent on this. Yes, you're getting performance in spades on this. Temperatures are lower. Yes, you can undervolt this too. I know some people are wondering because there have been some BIOS mitigations in some laptops for the Plunderbolt, say that 3 times fast, vulnerability. But anyway, this one lets you, I use Intel XTU, undervolt it. Now, 10th gen CPUs can't take as much undervolting without crashing versus previous gens, but I was running it at negative 90 for the undervolt, and the CPU core cache undervolt at about negative 50, and it dropped temperatures again about, depending on the game, like The Witcher 3, it dropped about 8 to 9 degrees centigrade. And some other games like Borderlands 3 didn't make as much of a difference, maybe 2 degrees. So yes, you can undervolt this too to mitigate those temperatures, but where before Alienware sounded like a Dyson vacuum cleaner on high and the core temps were hitting 99 and throttling like crazy, playing most games at those settings, the CPU core is generally, the worst I saw was like 95, 92 to 95. Wow, really good. And with undervolting, again, you're going to drop that. So for Alienware, that's an improvement, and that puts it in line with pretty much every other thin and light gaming laptop. Not a problem. The fans, the change to the fans is probably my favorite thing. I actually couldn't use our Alienware M15 R2 that we had in-house for review for games because I couldn't take the noise that it made. This is a different story. The fans sound like jet engines in a good way, like a turbine, like whoa, a little bit, but not that huge blast of air everywhere. So they're pretty much tame now. Now you can set your fan profiles using Alienware Command Center, and there's a variety of them. And in terms of performance, none of those profiles for our not overclocked Core i7, it's not an overclockable CPU, would really make that much of a difference. But you can change the fan profiles. You can set it to cool, for example, if you want it to be a little bit quieter. So enjoyable now. A different experience for Alienware. Speaking of overclocking, if you want, you can get the Core i9, which is the overclockable Core i9. So you've got the 6-core i7 that we have, and you have that Core i9 8-core option for you. Now, if you put the Core i9 with an RTX 2080 Super GPU in here, you're probably looking at more heat. So lastly, there's battery life, and this won't be a good part of the story, at least not for ours with the 300 Hertz display, because this doesn't have Optimus. There's no switchable graphics. There's no hardware key. There's no FN plus F7 to switch your GPUs. It's running on dedicated graphics all the time, and you have a high refresh display. So on average, about 3 hours. The good news is they have actually increased battery capacity. With the R2, they dropped it and everybody complained. So now it's back up to 86 watt-hour battery, which is a pretty good capacity. Ours comes with a 240-watt charger, and when gaming with AAA titles, it will use right up to almost 240 watts, so appropriate size charger for it. Now, if you get the full HD 144 Hertz display that does support Optimus, your battery life will be better. If you get the 4K model, you're certainly not going to see great battery life there. But again, this is not the most portable thing. You're probably not dragging this from class to class, I don't think. All right, here's the bottom, and this is where the air intake happens along this area, so don't strangle it and put it on your bedspread. It also has air intake above the keyboard area where the honeycomb grills are there. Exhaust air out the rear and out the sides, and these are the bottom speaker grills. And of course, there are ones on the side, front edges in addition. So to take this off, Phillips head screws, pretty simple. Work your way around the front with a guitar pick to loosen it up and lift it up from the front. And this is magnesium alloy. You can hear it sounds like metal, looks like metal. Yeah, see that? That's the underside. And here are our internals. So we've got our SSDs right here. This is the boot SSD. It came with that copper heatsink. We have a 1 terabyte drive and a reasonably good performance, as you saw from the benchmarks, not the very fastest, but cool temperatures. Here's the second one. You can actually order it with RAID 0 if you want with those two. But wait, there's more. There's actually a little shorty slot here for a shorty SSD if you want to add in a third drive. So that part's good. No upgradable RAM, like I said. Wi-Fi is soldered on board. This is the 86 watt-hour battery here. It's all of its glory, and these are the two speaker drivers that flank it, like most every laptop designed the same way. The fan cages, these are big fans. Again, you can see how they exhaust, what directions they go in. That's very good to see. Also, they've increased the number of VRMs. They're using 6 VRMs on the Core i7 now, and they've done fancy-nancy 12-phase voltage regulation for the GPU. So VRM issues, not a problem anymore, and they're all heat synced down. Not that I can show you because it's on the other side of the motherboard, which is right here, that teeny little part of it right there. So you can see this is the underside of the die for the CPU and the GPU there. So that's the Alienware M17 R3, and they have finally gotten it right after several generations of, I won't say thermal atrocities, but you know, I'm thinking it. I am. So finally, fans that are really tolerable. They're just fine. Core temperatures that I can live with. If you want to take it apart and repaste it or liquid metal or whatever else, world's your oyster. You can do that as long as you're okay with that inverted motherboard, which is annoying. The things that I don't like about this are obviously the soldered RAM. The soldered Wi-Fi I care less about. The soldered RAM hurts. You do have expansion for your SSDs. That's nice with several slots inside. The display options, visually, I like them a lot. And now we have 4K to choose from, which is something that the R2 dragged its feet on. I'm Lisa from MobileTechReview. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos and hit that notification bell so you know about them.